And this is where being strategic about the projects you take on are so important when you're thinking as a business owner. So you really need to go through moments when you have your designer hat on and other moments when you are your business owner hat. For me, this was one of those occasions.
Hi, I'm Beth Beesky, the founder of More Time to Design and your host of the Design Dialogues podcast. I've been a designer for the last 12 years and I've run my own studio for 5. And I know how hard it is to run a successful business. You not only need to be great at designing, but you need to be great at all the other things as well. I created More Time to Design, a software platform to help designers run efficient studios, and I've created the Design Dialogue podcast to help us all learn together. Each week, we will meet professionals who are at the top of their game doing things that help us run our studios. We'll have conversations with social media managers, interior design mentors, copywriters, stylists, photographers, suppliers, and also designers who have been in the game for a long time and who have such a wealth of knowledge to share. I hope that each week you feel inspired and informed at the end of each of our design dialogues. So join me for the Design Dialogue podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Design Dialogues podcast, and it is the first Solo with Beth episode for 2025. Before I get into the episode, I want to remind you all about the health check, and I really encourage you to book one in if you are wanting to have 2025 be a successful year in your studio. In the health check, you work with me for 8 weeks and we go through your systems and processes and see where you could be doing things better. We also talk about big strategic things, and if you are looking to make some changes in your studio, maybe you are thinking about growing the studio or changing things in a way, I really encourage you to book a health check-in, because having you're able to tap into my years of experience, and especially my years as a general manager working with large studios. So it's a bit more than just systems and processes. It's really thinking about those big strategic things. So if you would like to book in for a health check, I do only have limited spots every month. So you can follow the link in the show notes, or you can jump onto the website and book one in. So let's get into today's episode. So recently, I was fortunate enough to have one of my projects from the Navy Edit published in House and Garden. And I don't think it matters how long you've been an interior designer, how long you've been in business, how many times it's happened. It's always a thrill to see your work in print. And I particularly was thrilled with this one because the project got the cover, which is, it was a really lovely Christmas surprise. I knew it was coming out. I didn't know we were going to be on the cover. But I know this is such a thing that so many designers strive for, and I think it's great. I think it's such a great brand building and authority building tool that we have. So I thought today I would talk a little bit about the process of the project and how we got to the end point of it being published in House and Garden, because so often we see these beautiful projects in magazines, but we never know the backstory of them, and it's not always as straightforward and as glamorous as people think. So I thought I would give you a bit of a backstory of the project and also a bit about how it ended up in the magazine and the process we went through, because I've had lots of people reach out to me, go, how did you do it? Did the photographer, how does it all work? So to give you a little bit of backstory of the project, so it's a beautiful home on Sydney's Lower North Shore that is for a delightful family that it was a real joy to work with. And I do have to say, this is one of those projects where the team, the architect, the builder, it was a really beautiful project to work on. However, it kind of needed to be because this project happened all through COVID. So I am really confident that if we hadn't had such a strong team, this project would not have ended up as the way it did. And it is a really beautiful home. So I was first contacted by the client in December 2020. Now, I had my daughter in the end of September in 2020. So she was about 3 months old. We had just been through the first year of COVID, and I didn't really have a strong plan of how I was going to go back to work. I didn't know what was going to happen with COVID. I had a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old at this stage. And I very, very clearly remember the first phone call from the client. I had just managed to get my son in the car and my daughter in the car, and my daughter was asleep, and I was standing in my driveway, and it was that perfect timing of both children were restrained, and so I could take the call. I think all parents know that moment where they're restrained and you walk around the car and you're like, oh, okay, peace for 2 seconds. Anyway, so I took the call and I explained to the client, I was like, oh, I'm not really sure how this will work. I'm still kind of working out what my, return to work is. And she's like, that's fine. Can we chat in kind of end of January? She had school-aged children, so she didn't really want to do anything over the school holidays. So I thought, let's just give this a go. Let's see how we go. So we started with the process at the start of 2021, and there was a couple of things about this project that were actually red flags for me. So for starters, I was coming in really kind of halfway through the process. The client had already chosen a lot of the fixtures and fittings, and to start with, they were really wanting me to just kind of confirm what they'd chosen. They had done it alongside the architect, and they had already worked with an interior designer to some degree, but that relationship, they were like, no, they're not quite right. So that was a bit of a red flag for me, because I was like, oh, like really what impact am I going to be able to have here? Like, what am I going to do? But there was a couple of other things that were really big green flags for me. And one of them in particular was who the architect was on the project. And this is where being strategic about the projects you take on are so important when you are thinking as a business owner. So you really need to go through moments when you have your designer hat on and other moments when you are your business owner. For me, this was one of those occasions. So this architect does a lot of work in the area, and a lot of the homes that they work on are really my ideal client, ideal home, ideal style. And I had known about this architect. I'd kind of like been on the periphery, and I knew this would be a great way to start a relationship with this architect. And so from a strategic business point of view, I was very much like, this most probably isn't the ideal time from my family perspective. This isn't the ideal point at which I like to come in on a project. However, this is a great architect that I should be forming a working relationship with, as they could be a great referral partner. So I took on the project, and as the project went along, it became very evident that my scope would increase and that I would have a lot of impact on the project, which is fantastic. Now, we are at this point, we are kind of back into lockdown. We are back into the chaos of COVID. There was a lot of delays on this project that were completely and utterly unavoidable due to COVID. One of the biggest problems was the flooring was delayed. So the project definitely dragged on. And one of the things that caused was fatigue in the client. So young family, managing, there were school-age children, so they were juggling children being home during COVID whilst building, all of the restrictions that we had on us. So managing the client fatigue of the process was really something that was quite challenging in this project, because it meant that I had to really adapt my processes to meet her where she was. It was one of those things that I knew and I could see really early on as we were going through kind of this, second phase of which locked in all of the built selections, but we were then moving on to the furniture and the styling and the some decorative lighting, some wallpaper, that I needed to adapt my process to meet her where she was, because it was just not going to work if I tried to force her to come into my process and move at the speed that I normally would. And that is something that is so important when you are thinking about your systems and processes. You have to build your processes in a way that you can flex. So you can still stay within your process, but you can meet your client where they are. Obviously, COVID was an extreme case of this, but, there will be times when they might have a health crisis, or they need to care for a family member, or if they've got small children, like all the curveballs that they throw into you. So making sure that your processes have flex in them so you can meet the client where they are is so important. So here we are, the project's kind of where it took us about 18 months to get all of the furniture and kind of decorative lighting into the house, between kind of the slower process of selecting things and the process of like COVID delays, all of it. But we finally got it all in, and it was definitely something where the client, we kind of kept on adding layers to the house, which is not normally the way I normally work. You normally spec the whole thing, but for this client, it was a really great process and it worked so well. And I think that's something else when you're working with a client on a full house. This was a new build. So I came on in 2021. They had already been working on the house with the architect for about 18 months prior to that. Might have even been a bit longer. So by the time we're getting to this point, they've been in the build process for 4 years or so. That's a long time when you are doing it alongside work and family commitments. So it's always something that I think you have to be mindful of with clients, that you are sometimes going to have to slow the process down to get the end result that the house deserves and that you're wanting to achieve for the client. So we kind of got to the end of all of that, and the architect was really keen to get the house photographed, and I was keen to get the house photographed, and we pulled it all together. And at the end of 2023, we had the house photographed. Now, this was something that was a really great process. We used Simon Whitbread, who is just the most delightful photographer to work with. That was a really key part, like choosing the right photographer, choosing the right styling for the home. So there is a little bit of styling that's in the photo shoot, but we didn't overstyle the house. And I was able to hire some things and borrow some things. So having relationships with different stores is so helpful when it comes to this part of a project. So we had the project photographed at the end of 2023. Now, this is always the bit that I get asked a lot about, is how did it go from being photographed to getting into the magazine? So for this particular home, Simon has done a lot of work with lots of magazines, and he knew exactly which magazines this home would be a right fit for. And House and Garden was the perfect fit. And there was a couple of things that happened throughout the shoot that we made sure we captured due to the fact we wanted to pitch it into House and Garden and a couple of others. And one of those was, for example, making sure that we got a picture of the master bedroom. Now, in this home, the master bedroom, it's a beautiful room, but it's very understated and it's quite simple in a way. And it was definitely a room that I didn't necessarily think about photographing. But because for House and Garden, Simon knew that if we didn't have a photo of a bedroom, in particular a master bedroom, then it wouldn't be considered for the magazine. So those kind of little snippets of information are so helpful. So leaning on the photographer or the stylist, if you're using them, who has kind of a long-term relationship with the magazine people, is really, really helpful. So Simon submitted the photos to the magazine on our behalf, and that was great because I don't have relationships with the magazine people. The architect has had projects featured before, but once again, it had always been submitted through the architect, through the photographer. So Simon submitted the photos, and then from there, they came back and they were like, yep, love it. And they scheduled a publication date for September. Now, this was early 24 that this was happening. And I was like, great. The months tick on and we don't really hear anything. And then September comes by or the end of August comes by and we're like, oh, we're not in there. We hadn't heard from them. There'd been no story written. So the architect, actually, she reached out to the people at the magazine and were like, just wanted to touch base. And they were like, no, we haven't forgotten you. It's coming out in December. So keeping in touch with, like, don't just assume, oh, they've forgotten about us or whatever kind of thing. Who knows if we were scheduled for December, or who knows if that email was just really well timed. So make sure that you kind of, once you get in with people, make sure you keep in touch. You don't need to hound them, but just those regular little touch points and contact with them is so helpful. And then obviously the magazine came out in December. So prior to that, so there is an article written about the project. The beautiful writer sent across some questions for us to provide her with information so she could craft the story. And it's, she captured it so well. And it was a really beautiful article. It wasn't from just my perspective or the architect's perspective, but also the homeowner's perspective. And once again, that's really dependent on the art magazine that it's going for. So, House and Garden has a very different feel to, say, a Vogue Living article. And then the magazine came out, and I have to say, seeing the magazine in the local little IGA in the very small country town that my parents live in, because when I finally got there, my first opportunity to buy the magazine was in there. Actually, my husband came home with it for me, which was very exciting. So that thrill of seeing your project on a magazine cover in a shop is truly, it's just great. It makes all the hard work worth it. So that is a little snapshot of how, like, the backstory of the project and how we got to the magazine and the process. And I just really encourage you, if you have, being published on your kind of wish list, it's definitely something to work towards. Does it make the phone ring straight away? Absolutely not. I think most designers will tell you this. But what it does do is it builds your authority. It's another touch point, another data point for future clients to see your work, to see that you're a published designer is, it's a real authority point for you. So I encourage you all, if this is on your wish list, think about the photographer that you're using when you do go to shoot your photos. Go through the magazines that you want your project to be seen in and see who are the photographers that projects are commonly featured, because there's a very good chance they have the relationship with the magazine. And if they don't, they're going to know who you should be talking to. So that's one thing to be considered when you are photographing a project. choose photographers that have relationships with where you want the project to go. And the other thing as well is like there's so many online platforms now that are fantastic. And reaching out to them and being published within them is almost, it's a new version of the magazines these days. So I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of insight into how the process of how we went from initial phone call with, a 3-month-old in the car to published magazine article. It has been a bit of a wild ride, but I am particularly proud of this project, not just because of how beautiful it is. Like I am really proud of my work in this one, but also I think knowing where I was with my family and with COVID and my business, it was just a real, it's one that I'm really proud of. And I don't often take the time to kind of acknowledge how proud I am. So thank you for listening, and I will see you next week for our next Design Dialogue.
Thank you for listening to this Design Dialogue. I hope you have found it full of inspiration and helpful information to take into your design studio. If you like the podcast and want to hear more, consider sharing it or writing a review, as it helps us reach more people, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to unlock the power of effortless studio management and elevate your design business to new heights, please follow the links in our show notes to see how more time to design can help you build a better business. Have a great week, and I will see you for our next Design Dialogue.